Well, the first question that I have for you, and thank you for joining us this evening and spending so much time with us this evening. What is shamanism? Can we start right there?
Sure. It's shamanism. A lot of people have the wrong idea about what shamanism is. Shamanism, first of all, is not a religion. It's a tradition of time-tested techniques to help you connect to the world and its inhabitants through the web of life. It's also a way of living in balance with all things while unifying your mind, body, and soul. The shaman sees the world differently and strives to understand and flow with the forces of the Earth Mother. Yeah, and to the shaman, all things are alive and contain some form of consciousness, even rocks. And that consciousness, regardless of what frequency or degree it's in, it deserves to be acknowledged and respected. In short, shamanism teaches us how to live impeccably.
In balance with the earth, as opposed to fighting.
That's right.
The earth and fighting the natural. Sort of like our modern culture kind of goes against that grain, and shamanism tries to go along with it. That's
right. And in fact, shamans, along with other indigenous people, are considered the stewards of the planet, to heal it and take care of it.
Mm-hmm. And so you say all objects have a consciousness, even inanimate objects?
Yeah, because to us, they look inanimate, but actually, when you look at an object, even let's take a rock, for example.
Okay.
That is a solid form of energy. Everything's made of energy. I think everybody accepts that. And in a rock in that form is just, it's what we call energy in a phase lock loop. And that means the energy is stable, it's circulating, and it holds that pattern. But anything made of energy is connected to everything else it's actually, through the 0-point field. But that rock is pulsating with a specific frequency, and it may not have the sophistication that a human being has, for example, for logical reasoning and things like that, but it does know that you're there, and that's a hard concept to wrap your mind around, but you can pick up a rock, just an ordinary rock, and that rock knows that it's in your energy field. It will react with you in a very subtle way. As you go up, in frequency, as you go up, in higher consciousness, as you go into plants, those start reacting on emotional levels. You can communicate with plants. There's been a lot of scientific experiments that know that plants, through various techniques and various, equipment that they hook up to the plants, they know that the plants are aware of what's going on. You can't have a conversation with a plant because it's just a little beyond, their logical reasoning. As you move up, with other objects, it gets a little more sophisticated, all the way up to trees and animals. Even animals, dogs are higher up there, but birds and things like that, they speak to us. If you learn to listen, they speak to us in abstract terms. They also use pictures. They'll send you an image in their minds or from their minds, and that's how they communicate. But everything really, is in touch with everything else. And so, I wouldn't advise that you go in your backyard and talk to rocks or anything, especially if you have neighbors. But if you get one thing too on we're talking about an ordinary rock. If you get into more crystalline structure, there tends to be a lot of communication capable, through, and like I say again, you're not going to even get pictures from rocks, but you can sense their awareness, and you can pick up a crystal and actually, send the image of what its properties are, what it's good for, what it can do as far as interacting with human energy. And this is how a lot of indigenous shamans over the centuries, that's how they learn that certain stones are good for elevating your spirit. Certain stones are good for protecting you, other than throwing them at somebody. And same thing with plants. That's how they learn to deal with plants. And that, that's how it's not just trial and error. There'd be a lot of dead people because, a lot of plants are poisonous, but you can actually communicate and know whether to eat the plant, know whether to use it, on a wound just by, meditating. You've got to shift your own consciousness and you move it down to that frequency, and there's a communication that takes place. So, yeah, everything has a consciousness. The shamans see everything as alive.
So this is a normal state of being for those who walk a shamanistic path. And to all of us, that may seem pretty far out that a rock has consciousness, but to you and to shamans who study this their entire life, to indigenous cultures across the world, especially in South America, this is a very normal way of life for them. They don't even question it. So how many different types of shamanism are there?
Shamans have walked the earth for 50,000 years. They exist in every part of the world, in every culture. But besides Toltec shaman, which are a little bit different from a lot of other indigenous shamans, there are Peruvian, there are Native American shaman, Asian, African, Scandinavian, Russian, in various European traditions, like Druids. Druids are shaman. They fall into that category. Also witches, European witches. That is a type of shaman. There are different cultures that have different beliefs and different religious aspects, but overall what they all those types do is basically the same thing. And there is no one country or one culture that can lay an exclusive claim to the practice of shamanism. It's something that's evolved throughout the centuries.
So how is Toltec shamanism different from all the rest?
Well, the Toltec shamans, they would be considered, out of all the other different types of practices, would be considered the scientists of the shamanic world. For whatever reason, they don't just, for example, they don't just accept something, for what it is. They want to know why. And that's one thing that drew me to it, is because I'm the same way. You can tell me something, but I want to know how it works. And that's what I've found with Toltec shamanism. They've gone much deeper into more complex subjects. And, for example, time and time manipulation. No other shamanic culture that I've ever encountered deals with the manipulation of time. And at least this is the only one I've ever heard of. And part of this, I believe, is because of where the Toltec shamans originally got their knowledge. And this was, they were part of the Olmec tribe, and a large fraction of it broke off. And there were several, indigenous people, shaman, that ended up in Peru at one time. And the time frame is a little sketchy. This is information that was taught to me. It's called the Toltec core knowledge. And so I don't have all the dates and everything But they broke away, and they were in Peru, somewhere near Machu Picchu. It might have been right on the same spot. This would have been before that city was built. But they claim that beings from the sky are the ones that came down and educated them. They gave them this knowledge. And that knowledge was about sciences, was about survival. It was apparently a lot of different things. And there were a group of them that took this knowledge, and they started on a journey, a quest. And I believe, I'm speculating here, but I believe that they went on this journey, because of what they were told by whoever it was that told them this. I can only speculate who that might be. And they started, traveling to different parts of Mexico. They moved up to central Mexico, and they ended up finally, and this took a long time. This didn't happen in one lifetime, but they took this knowledge. They were more nomads than anything else until they found the place they were looking for, which was Teotihuacan. And that's where they settled, and they built the city. They developed their abilities, even further. That site has, I'm probably getting ahead of myself a little here, but that site has tremendous energy properties.
So this is a faction of the Olmecs that traveled up to Mexico to take that knowledge that came from the beings from the sky and chose to break off from the Olmecs and go up to Mexico and do their own thing.
Yeah, whatever it is, that they were guided, but I don't know for sure if it was the beings that gave them the knowledge or something else that drove them.
All right, and this is part of the lore, the Toltec lore that is passed down by word of mouth?
Yeah, this is part that came actually from, it originated with the ancient Toltec tradition, and it evolved up until a point of a little over 500 years ago. And that's when there was a great war, and there was a battle in Teotihuacan, and everything was destroyed. And the people were divided into groups. As far as the shamans, they were divided into two groups. There were a group that was using and abusing the powers, because the ancient Toltec shamans had the ability to command the elements. They could call in storms. They had the type of stuff you see in science fiction movies. And there was a battle between the Toltec priest and the Toltec shamans. It's kind of hard to explain the difference between the two. They were all the same, but there was a group that was using the powers for personal gain. They were using it to control people, to get what they want. And the other side of the coin, the good priest, for example, they were very opposed to that. They knew it was against the rules, whatever rules were set. And so there was this great war between the two. And nobody really won. I think the good priests were winning. But at one point during this battle, in the temple of Quetzalcoatl, which is in Teotihuacan, something came up out. They claim it was their god. They came up out of the temple and condemned them for what was happening and destroyed the entire city. Everything that could burn was burned. The only thing that remains is the stones. And
all right, that is a good place to hold it. I believe this has only been passed through word of mouth from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And this is a story that has never been told publicly. Everybody stay right where you are. You won't hear this anywhere else. All right, so I want to clarify, if you could, just for a minute here, what is meant by shamans using their power in the wrong way. First of all, tell us just how powerful they were. What could they do?
The ancient Toltec shamans, the old lineage, we refer to it as, they were focused on power. They were focused on gathering and tapping into the forces of nature itself, and they could control the forces of nature. It's said that the shaman of the ancient lineage, they could throw lightning bolts. They could manipulate the elements of earth, air, water, and fire. And, some, of course, are better than others, but they could easily, fry you where you stand. The modern lineage changed, and they focus more on perception and awareness. And, they found that that's far more beneficial, to the human race. But they had power. They had... it was quite the battle that went on before Quetzalcoatl, or whatever it is that came out of that temple, before it put an end to it. 'Cause it was a ball of light that came up, and it started just burning everything. It was shooting out beams of energy. But the priests and, on both sides, it all started as a coup, actually. The bad priests, we'll just call them that, which are the bad shamans, they were using their powers. If they didn't like somebody and you crossed them, they killed you. And if, they wanted something from you, they could manipulate your mind. They were using everything for personal gain, and which is kind of human nature. Sometimes will go that way. But the other side, they were a group. We're talking a group of maybe a dozen people altogether. They wanted to keep it pure, and they knew that it was wrong to do that, and they were told it was wrong to do that, and that's what they were fighting. But there was a coup with the bad ones that tried to overtake, and they tried to kill the good ones so that they would rule the city, and that's where it all started. Word got out somehow that there was going to be some type of attack, and it's, a lot of the details are a little sketchy. This story has been told by, like you said, by word of mouth for the last 500 plus years, to only a small group of people at a time, just to perpetuate the knowledge, just so it wasn't lost. And once the priest did a pretty good job at destroying the city to start with. Some of the big statues were toppled, and they're still toppled today. I mean, nothing's been changed. But, there's no wood left in that city. There's nothing but the rocks. And after that happened, once everything was destroyed, they were condemned by, their god, Quetzalcoatl, and they were banished from the city. Everybody was banished. Now, at the time, there was 200,000 inhabitants, 200,000 Toltecs that lived not in that part of the city, that part of the city that everybody knows today, the ruins. That was more of a sacred area. The inhabitants of the city lived outside the city locally. But,
and just to clarify for the audience, Teotihuacan is where the Pyramid of the Sun is, and that's where there's that long strip, and there's a pyramid to designate each planet in our solar system, right?
Yeah, it's laid out exactly like our solar system. So they had advanced knowledge. Just like your guest last night was talking about advanced knowledge of indigenous people, and they were one of them. The problem with the Toltecs is they didn't have a written language, and so there's not a whole lot known about them. Their archaeologists are still making discoveries today, trying to find out more about them, but they didn't need a written language. They had powers of mind greater than your standard indigenous, people. They found a way to record information and things like that. They recorded it instead of on paper or wood or stone. They recorded it in the stone. It's like It's like our modern computers were reprogrammed, into crystalline structures of microchips. They did that with stone, and it's still there. It's just that, only shamans can really read it, someone who is adept enough. And, I myself am not to the point yet where I could go there and actually read what's recorded in some of the stones. It's not all of them. There are some key stones in a pyramid of the sun where information is recorded, digitally, if you will, but it's done with the mind. And once that's decoded, their entire history is there. All their entire knowledge that was given to them is encoded in the stones. Plus, there's a lot of hidden chambers that haven't been discovered yet. Some of them under the pyramid. Some of them, in fact, recently they've discovered one of the areas. They don't, last I heard, they hadn't really figured out what it was. There's a lot of small metallic balls and things under there. But there's a lot more than that in that city. It's just, you can't go digging the city up. But eventually, someday, they'll discover some of the other chambers and artifacts that lay there.
So only the most advanced shamans could record this information with their mind into certain stones, and then I guess it would stand to reason that only the most advanced shamans could then access that information later.
Yeah, it's like a massive archive, and the priests that were there at the time, they're the ones that put it in there, and they're the ones that could also decipher it. Carlos, he could decipher part of it, but not in its entirety. It's something that takes a great deal of skill and trial and error and personal power. We all carry a certain amount of personal power with us, and the more you have, the more your perception opens up.
So even a master like Carlos Castaneda couldn't read these stones. No. And I bet, let me ask you this, I bet if there is a shaman living today who could perform such a feat, he wouldn't tell anybody where those stones are, what they say, or how to do it.
You're exactly right. Okay. Those stones carry information beyond the Toltec core. Carlos called and he never wrote about this in his books because he wasn't really supposed to. That wasn't the purpose of his books, but we'll get into that a little later. But the Toltec core knowledge is what he taught to some of his students. And the idea was to teach that knowledge about the ancient lineage and everything they knew up to a certain point so that it would never be lost. It never actually will be because it's in the stones. It's just deciphering what's in the stones. It's you can't take an electronic equipment and go there and try to read it like you would a computer or something like that. It's not like a holograph. It's actually into another dimension, into that buffering zone or veil. And
you learned this from Carlos himself?
That's right. Yeah.
And he learned it from Toltec shamans himself?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he learned that. That was part of the information that's passed down. And the information, it's pretty vast. A lot of it is, excuse me, kind of out there, but the information is not just taught, like you and I are talking right now. And, you're learning a little bit about what I'm talking about, and, I'm sharing information, but it's the Toltec core knowledge, when it's passed on from teacher to student, it's far more vast. And the only way it can be done, because if I just tell you something, you could end up misinterpreting it. You could end up telling someone else and it would get changed. So the only way you can really be sure that that information is not lost is to alter the consciousness of the person that's learning it, that's being told it, and move to what they call a second attention. And that's something we'll get into when we talk about the assemblage point. But it's a heightened state of awareness. It's beyond hypnosis. it's, anything you're told gets recorded in your, not just your brain, but in your actual energy fields. We have energy fields around us that comprise a lot of our other parts of our body, subtle bodies and things like that, all the way up to the soul. That information gets recorded there, and it's not always accessible. It's like when I'm talking to you here, I can't reach up into that core knowledge and pull information that I don't already know out of it. I have to actually go into a meditation that will alter my perception and awareness. And that's by moving the assemblage point. Once I go into there, I have full access to any of that knowledge. Some of it, I've talked about before on my radio show. I've talked about on a few other shows, but not in any detail. A lot of the things I'm telling you tonight have never been released to the public anywhere.
And this shift in consciousness is something that the Toltecs have known about and harnessed for hundreds of years. It really makes me wonder how they discovered that. Has this just been a secret of shamans throughout history?
Yeah, well, in this, we're talking about the Toltec shamans. It's not other, cultures. They probably have their own, origin stories, but, and this is a kind of a gray area because I don't know everything, and, it might be stored in the second attention, but, I haven't actually pulled anything like that out. The information either came down from the beings that originally gave them the knowledge, or it's something that they learned, because from that point until, Teotihuacan was built, was a few hundred years. And so they had time to cultivate and learn. Shamans often will speak, all shamans will often speak to different, like we were talking about plants, animals, things like that, but also spirit. There are spirit guides. There are, in the Toltec tradition, there are allies. Allies can be dangerous to deal with, but they hold a vast amount of knowledge. So it could have come from that source too. It's hard to put your finger right exactly where the origin of that kind of knowledge came from.
And we are unraveling, again, ancient secrets here.
Yep.
And so, okay, so let's just back up a little bit. I'd like to know how you got involved with shamanism in the first place. And we will get into the assemblage point and spirit guides and spirit animals and allies. Don't worry about that. I won't forget. But I want to know how you got involved on this path.
Well, I actually have been interested in the paranormal, the occult, and things like that since I was about 16 years old. The thing that kind of guided me, there was two major things in my life. The amazing Kreskin, he's a friend of mine, but back then, he was just on Johnny Carson and all those TV shows constantly. He came out with a game called Kreskin's ESP, which I still have to this day. And this was in, right around late 60s, early 70s. And it just taught you, it had the basic things that you have in, you study in parapsychologists use Zener cards and pendulums and things like that. And that really got my interest going. And I used to get in trouble in school because I kept testing people's ESP ability. But that kind of led me to studying other things. When I was, I think I was probably in 10th grade or something like that, I was at my grandparents' house, and my grandmother always had this room where she never let anybody in. And so she was the only one for decades that ever went in there. And she left it open one day. And of course, my curiosity, I went in there and I found this big giant book, and it was a genealogy of our family. And, so I, started going through it and stuff. And then I I found an entry that really, intrigued me. I found out that directly related to Bridget Bishop, which was the first person hung in Salem in 1692.
That's right. Yes, I know who Bridget Bishop was.
Yeah, and when I found that out, that really fired up my interest in the occult and different things. So I was always kind of leaning that way. And I studied, off and on, I studied parapsychology. That's what I was doing at UCLA in the early 70s when I was studying in the library, and I was studying, I think it was on psychotropic plants and mushrooms. And I went over and grabbed a book off an upper shelf, and before I got it completely out, another hand behind me grabbed it. And I turned around and looked, and there's this guy, this Mexican, standing there with a big giant smile from ear to ear, just looking at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't let go of the book. And so I stood there, seemed like forever, but finally, he was kind of freaking me out with the way he was looking at me. And so I let go of the book, and I told him he could have it. And he said, "Thank you, Marcos." And I had no idea how he knew my name, but then he introduced himself as Carlos Castaneda. And he was doing research on something, I forget what it was.
Did you know who he was when he said his name?
When he said his name, I had heard, because of my interest in the occult and things, I have heard of him. I'd never read his book or anything. He had, a book out by then, the Teachings of Don Juan. That was his first book. And, he talked to me for a while. We sat down and talked a little bit about the subject of the book, and he told me that he was, doing some research for a paper, and he, probably talked to me for about an hour in there, and we hit it all pretty good, and then we had lunch, and then we parted and went our own different ways. And he went off into Mexico. I think he was going down to meet up with, someone in his group. And I went off a different direction, and I ended up, moving to Las Vegas. I was there for a while, and then I think it was, I forget how many years later it was. It was at least 7, 8 years, something like that. He shows up at a place I was working in Palm Springs, where I ended up moving to, and he's, comes in and he's talking to me, and it was like no time had passed at all, except he said to me, he said, "Marcos, you got fat." And I said, "Gee, thanks, Carlos." Oh, he had a sense of humor. He's a practical joker, too.
Oh, yeah, he did. I only read one of his books, but even in that one book, there was plenty of humor. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I used to be the focus of his practical jokes. But he told me that he told me a little bit about the time when we met. He said that the reason he did what he did, in the library there, was because Spirit had pointed him out, or pointed me out to him. And when he speaks of something like spirit, it's, I guess there's no other way to describe it, but some form of entity that told him and gave him an omen, which he never did tell me what the omen was, but with him, the way that his teacher met up with him is that there were, I believe there were butterflies or moth. No, there was a moth that was flying around his head and wouldn't leave him alone when his teacher first met him. And, Carlos wasn't he wasn't the stereotype that usually was picked by a shaman, but that was a sign that Spirit had given his teacher, Don Juan. And with me, it was something else, apparently. I don't know what it was. And he explained that to me, and he said Spirit told him to mess with me. And that's what he did. He's freaking me out. It's like a Jack Nicholson smile, just staring at me. And So after that, we talked a little bit more, and I asked him what he'd been up to, and he'd written one or two more books by then. And his first three books he was writing and using them actually as a thesis. You know, he was granted a PhD on those first three books. Mm-hmm. But, you know, anyway, he talked to me for, I don't know, it must have been a couple hours. And then, he told me that, Spirit pointed me out that he was supposed to, teach me different things about Toltec shamanism. And by then I'd read, the books that he had out. And so I knew what that meant. And I was a little trepidatious about that because, if you read, especially the first three books, you'll see a lot of things that he went through that were horrifying and dangerous. But I was excited at the same time, so I started asking him, when are we going to start this apprenticeship? And, what do I have to do and all that? And he...
Did you have any idea what you were about to get into?
No. No, and it wasn't exactly the same as his, but it was more of a modern, version because he was taught old school. He had to go out in the desert for weeks at a time.
Yes.
And so mine revolved more around modern times in the city, but it's still, there were times when I thought I was going to die. And, that's how it actually got started. The thing is, he told me at the time that we're not going to do it right now. He said, after I moved to the north. I had no plans of moving to the north or anything like that. But as it turns out, about a year and a half later, I ended up moving. My mother was moved to North Idaho, and I decided to move up here so we could be closer. I could help her out and stuff, and that's what happened. I moved to the north. And it didn't even dawn on me until one day he shows up, and it was actually night. He shows up in a car sitting next to me at a fast food restaurant. I think it was Wendy's or something, but we were sitting there, and I looked over, and he's got that Jack Nicholson smile again, just staring at me. I just about jumped out of the car. But that's where it all started.
Wow. Well, there are probably members of the listening audience right now who don't know who Carlos Castaneda was, what type of person he was, the sort of things that he did. Now, before the break, I had asked you if you could tell us just briefly, for those who do not know, what kind of man was Carlos Castaneda?
Carlos was an enigma. He was a very private person and almost eccentric to in some ways. But once he opened up to you, once you got to know him, he was he embraced life. He was full of energy. He had a sense of humor that wouldn't quit. You ask a lot of you listeners to Google him during the break, and a lot of people, there's tens of thousands of hits they would have got. Most of them are, in praise, but there are going to be some people that didn't like Carlos. A lot of that, they tried to disprove him, that, things happened the way they did. And the thing with Carlos, like I told you a little while ago, he used his first three books as his thesis. And for his PhD, it created enormous professional jealousy. And there were, some people that cheered him on, some of his colleagues, and some that were very upset about that. And they spent a lifetime actually trying to disprove him, which they never could. Carlos, I think one of the biggest things they would grab onto is that, things in his books, he has a lot of them dated, the events and all that. Sometimes they were out of sequence. They didn't happen exactly in the same sequence it shows, but that's because those books read like novels. I mean, he had 30 million followers when he left the world, and they were published in 8 different languages all around the world, and that's because he changed the way that we perceive things, the way we perceive the world itself. That's why Time magazine had him on the cover twice and named him Godfather of the New Age, because he changed the world forever.
Was Carlos Castaneda a true shaman?
Oh yeah, yeah. He was, true to everything. He was different than the people that came before him, and there's a reason for that. He is the real deal. A lot of the things that he wrote about in his books, outlandish things that people have trouble comprehending. A lot of those things I witnessed, he reproduced, and, some things he put me through. So he commanded the elements.
Well, I remember reading The Active Side of Infinity, where he describes running off a cliff and flying.
Yeah. And, sometimes the leap into the abyss was transformative. It would change his energy. But there is a thing that in Toltec shamanism, where the Toltec shamans are trained to see different types of energy. I can see, various kinds of energy, and especially earth energies. Everything, has energy coming out of it. But there is a very unusual phenomenon that exists on this planet everywhere, and it's called the lines of the world. That's what the Toltec shamans call it. And they are actual, it's like how, you see a magnetic field, or the gravity or the magnetic field of the earth drawn on paper and pictures and things like that, where the lines come out the top and go down the bottom. Mm-hmm. It's similar to that, but this energy is very hard to detect with scientific equipment. That's why it hasn't really been discovered, because it's not energy from this dimension. It's the stuff that gravity is made of. And that's why there's been so much controversy trying to, figure out what gravity is. It's a product of a energy that does not exist in the physical world. Scientists call that energy 0 point. And they are closing in on it, but they haven't quite got there yet. Shamans, or Toltec shamans, knew how to use that energy. And these lines of the world come up out of the surface of the planet, and they go up. I'm not sure how far they go. I think they go into space, and then they come back down again. But this is circulating energy. They're about anywhere, it depends on where you are on the planet. They're anywhere from 3 inches to a foot in diameter, and they exist every 10 feet in any direction. And that's, I haven't been to North Pole or South Pole, so I can't say what it's like there, but everywhere else I've been, those lines exist. And shamans, adept shamans, could use their own personal power through their navel chakra. They could shoot the energy out, their own personal power that they contained, and they could latch on to one of those lines, one of those moving lines of 0 point energy, if you will. And it's like putting a piece of Velcro, together. Once they got the frequency just right, they could lock in and they would levitate. They could literally fly. It's not something that all Toltec shamans can do. I've tried it a few times and got knocked on my butt. And it's just something, it's probably more, I have too much trepidation. I don't have enough faith that I can actually lock onto it, because it picks me up and throws me down. And it's one of the things that, how they learned about that, I don't know. The new lineage, after Teotihuacan was destroyed, they focused more on those type of things than they did on manipulating power. shaman of today, Toltec shamans can still manipulate power, but it's more consciousness and awareness. And when you become conscious of like those lines I'm talking about, and you can figure out a way to attach to them without being thrown or killed, because if you go up 30 feet in the air and you're not doing it right, you're going to fall 30 feet. Gravity sucks. But that's one way, and I've seen Carlos do that. I've literally seen him fly, and it freaked me out.
In the book that I read, he didn't explain anything that you're explaining now. No, his books, and that's something that, Carlos mentioned to me a couple times in my apprenticeship. People would buy his books, and they would try to emulate what he did. They would go into the desert and actually look for, a teacher, and they would try some of the movements and the principles he talked about, and that actually upset Carlos, because he told me, he didn't use his exact words, but he says that there is no knowledge in those darn books. He said that they are a representation of knowledge, of what actually is out there. And he said the true, how-to or nuts and bolts of the Toltec knowledge is completely different, from what you read in his books. His books just talked about that knowledge. And he would get upset when people took them and they tried to use them as a Bible. And they did this all the way, starting, I think, in 1969. People had been doing that. And there's been a lot of teachers come about to teach, the principles of Toltec shamanism. There's been books written about it, but they're based off of the actual writings of Carlos, which do not contain the information. It contains part of it. I see. So is it fair to say that Toltec shamanism, or shamanism in general, is the very definition of the occult, meaning hidden? All this is hidden knowledge, which is why it's not spelled out in his books.
Yeah, and it's even more than that. That's true, especially in Toltec shamanism. But he told me once, because I asked that question, about his books and why he doesn't teach people how to do anything like that. And he said that's not his job. He said that he was what they considered to be a transitional shaman. The lineage started a little over 500 years ago with two of the priests started telling, gathering a half a dozen students, and they would teach them over a 20-year period, sometimes, less, but Carlos was taught for 10. They would teach him the knowledge, and it would be perpetuated to another generation. And it went like that from word of mouth, teacher to student, for a little over 500 years. And then Carlos came into the picture. Carlos did not fit the type of student that usually a shaman or a nawal, as they were called, like the head shaman, the teacher. He didn't fit the stereotype. And he was an anthropology student. He lived in the city. He wasn't an Indian. It was, in fact, I think he might have been the first Mexican that was ever actually taught that. And the reason, and that's one of the things that puzzled his teacher. He didn't know why Spirit would give him a student like this, because he was, Carlos was a scientist. He was very analytical. He wrote everything down. He did everything that other shamans, and other students would never consider doing or didn't even know how to do.
So he combined the scientific world with the spiritual world.
Yeah, and the purpose for that turned out to be that, he was considered transitional in that the knowledge was perpetuated for 500 years, but the world wasn't ready for it yet. It was not at a point where it would be beneficial enough, and so it just kept being passed down, century after century, until it got to Carlos, and the world was ready. I mean, it's the late 60s, early 70s. The world was exploding in, people interested in consciousness and things. And so Carlos took this training and this knowledge, and he wrote about it. And by doing that, he took a secret knowledge, because nobody even knew this existed, that it was still being perpetuated. And he took this knowledge and he put it out to the public, out to the world. And, it was an instant success. People, loved his books. They saw a side of reality, a side of the universe that no one had ever talked about before.
Shamans walk in a different reality than all of us. Is that accurate?
Yeah, they can shift realities, put it that way. They don't see the world exactly the same way. It's a matter of perception. Part of the training teaches you how to turn it on and off, because there are a lot of energies. If you turn your sight on, there's a lot of energies in entities that you really don't want to see. It gets annoying. And so it's possible to turn it on and off. But yeah, they live in an entirely different world, a world where spirits and energies, are real things, and they're tangible. So they do walk a different path. And this, I'm speaking more on the Toltec shamans. Other shamans have equal abilities, but they're a lot of the other types of shamanism. They're your healers. They're the teachers. They don't get into the as much of the energy part or perception as the Toltecs do.
Okay, so can I ask a question here? Why is energy harnessing and manipulation so important to the Toltec shamans?
Well, originally in the old lineage, it's how they did things. I mean, those pyramids weren't easy to build, and so they're not the only ones that can manipulate energy through history. There have been others. That knowledge probably came from whoever taught them originally, where the core knowledge came from. But the modern lineage really isn't that concerned about manipulating energy, unless it's for the common good. The new lineage is more about improving yourself and the people around you, teaching people to walk in balance with nature. There is a lot of communication that goes on, but what happens when you open up your abilities, and this happens with a lot of psychic people too. I know a lot of very powerful mediums and psychics that actually consider what they have a curse, and I work with them to try to show them how to tune it down, how to put an on and off switch on. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the actual manipulation of energy is mainly used by the modern Toltec lineage as a self-defense mechanism, or if some type of special healing is needed. Because, they can draw down deep and siphon energy from the sun, from the earth. There are some that do it from other people, but only with consent. And by pulling that energy up, they can defend themselves, because, a psychic or a shaman that have this ability, and they stand out like a sore thumb in the paranormal world. They're like a beacon. And you'd be surprised at the amount of stuff that comes at you.
Well, I was just going to ask, self-defense against what?
I spent probably a good 2 years with Carlos, learning spiritual combat. And those are maneuvers and techniques to throw up shields, to actually attack entities that are coming. There are groups of entities that dwell within the buffering zone, the veil that separates our world from the other dimensions, that really are like energy vampires. I think they're interested more in tapping into energy sources, and it's their nature. And these entities are associated with the 4 elements. You can encounter an entity from the elemental kingdom of fire, for example, that, if you don't deal with them just right, that entity can cause problems in your life. And I've seen cases where they've actually started fires. And it's usually with the elemental entities like that, those are personifications of those particular forces of nature. And again, we're going back to the 0-point field. It has 4 basic frequencies that have been defined by Toltec shaman and probably other shamans too. And they deal with these 4 different frequencies of this energy. And it's like this energy has one personification that can come out at any place, any time. And it gets a little hard to wrap your mind around. But then there are also entities, spirits, ghosts, that have a nasty nature. A lot of people know me more for my research in parapsychology and the paranormal. I've invented several pieces of equipment as a result of my shamanic training for some of the big TV shows that are out there. And a lot of those places that they go to, people come under attack. Some of it's subtle, some of it's violent, where you're knocked to the ground. And this is one of the reasons, to answer your question about energy, that you have to have the clout. You got to flex your psychic muscles at the right time, or you could be killed. Especially shaman, because they have a great deal of energy about them. And anytime you have energy, it's like dangling a steak in front of a lion. So it's, that's why the modern lineage still dabbles in the power.
All right. So because they have such a, they have worked with energy fields so much that a shaman has a heightened energy field around them, a heightened ability to work with energies we don't see or even recognize as real. So then, therefore, they're more susceptible to attack.
Yeah.
By anything and everything, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So they constantly have to be in this state of defense.
Yeah, and that's one of the the drawbacks. In the beginning of the show, you mentioned about my research with the Monroe Institute and the professional division, and that's one of the things I do is try to control that energy through the hemisync technology, and also manipulate awareness so that people can learn to do a lot of these things without going through years of training, because the old techniques of the Toltec shamans, the old methods of training, stalking, dreaming, things like that, really are kind of obsolete now. There's a new technology that nobody knows this yet, but I'm going to release it to the public this year. And it'll take you, like, for example, what took me 2 or 3 years to learn, you'll be able to master the effects, the same thing, in about 2 or 3 weeks. And it's not, it's like some things people say, if you didn't earn it, if you didn't put the time in, then it's not really of any quality, or you don't appreciate it. But it's not true in this case. It's more of a way to open up your awareness and allow you to perceive, things that you normally wouldn't perceive.
Do you think people are going to be ready for that?
I've waited, I was told, it wasn't by accident. I was told that I had to wait till the time was right. And I've waited, 16, 17 years. I've been working on it, developing the technology to help people, go that way. A lot of people now, you're seeing more and more people that are psychic anyway. And I have a close personal friend that is constantly coming under attack, and she has no way to turn it off. And that's something that I do with the technology. This is the new direction of the new Toltec lineage. And through this technology, I can teach people how to turn it on and off, because if you're a beacon out there saying, come get me, you're going to be got. And a lot of physical mediums.
So for those who walk the shamanistic path, extrasensory mental abilities are real.
Yeah, that is correct.
It's not even a question. It's just absolutely real.
Yeah, it's a tangible thing, and it doesn't mean that a Toltec shaman can necessarily read your mind. It's not those kind of abilities, although a lot of times things like that will come through. It's more intuitive, though. But as far as people who are have the gift of being psychic or being sensitive, there are thousands and thousands of them now. Some of them I question, but a lot of them I know are the real deal, and it's a very real thing. It's tangible.
How do you know that a person truly has this gift?
Well, as a Toltec shaman trained for that many years, I've learned to perceive what we talked about a little bit before was the assemblage point. And that is a spot that's over the shoulder blade on your back, sticks out anywhere from 3 to 6 inches. And it's purely an energy focal point. Our energy, I guess I should explain first, we have a certain amount of personal energy, of life force energy. Again, 0 point energy. And that energy can't really be measured by any scientific equipment. You can measure biochemical activity, you can measure electrical activity the body gives off, and even to a certain point, magnetic. But this type of energy, the thing we call life, is of the 0 point nature, and because of that, you can't measure it. But people who are sensitive and shamans who are trained can see that energy as an egg-shaped, cocoon that surrounds you. And in most people, it exists about 3 feet out from your actual body. If someone is ill or sick or, just a very lethargic person, that'll shrink down to maybe as low as 1 foot. And that's how you can kind of tell if a person is well or not. But this energy flows from the top of the head. It flows out, forming that cocoon, goes back into the feet and circulates back and forth. And it's not just an amorphous flow of energy. It's a fibrous flow. There are fibers that range from the size of fishing line up to, I've seen it as big as like a pencil. But usually it's the smaller fibers. And if you look close, it's like, fiber optics. It's similar to that, and it just comes out and circulates back in. These fibers are controlled, and they all pass through the same point. They pass through an area about the size of, usually about the size of a $50 to silver dollar, and they flow through here and then back out again. And what that does, that's called the assemblage point of awareness, because it defines our awareness, how we perceive the world around us. It's, picture it like a tuning knob on a radio. You turn it a little bit one way, you pick up different frequencies. For most humans, it's locked solid in position. It stays in that spot and never moves, and it's always in that spot for humans. That's why humans perceive the world pretty much the same way. And that's that conditioning happens from the time of birth. And, at that time, the assemblage point is more fluid. It's moving around in babies. As you get older and older, experience and exposure to, your parents and other people solidifies that. And it starts to, just turn solid so it doesn't move. And that way everybody sees the same thing. I hold an apple in my hand, you see an apple. But if you take that assemblage point and move it, energetically, if you can actually move it just a fraction of an inch, say a 16th of an inch, all of a sudden you're going to start perceiving other energies around that you don't normally see. If you move it too far, you're going to perceive an entirely different world. You'll be up in what they call the astral planes. You'll have that vision. You'll still be here, but you're going to have the vision of that. A lot of clairvoyance, some of the great clairvoyants in history, and some people that I know, now, their assemblage point, and I've seen this actually happening on these type of people. Their assemblage point is in flux. It vacillates and moves around just a little bit, but it almost like blurs a little bit. And what it's doing is vibrating and moving. When it does that move, that's when their psychic, tendencies, that's where their perceptions change, and they get visions, they do psychic readings, things like that. They have clairvoyant, visions. That's when that assemblage point is moving, because they're tuning into other energy systems. When Carlos would put me into a second attention, he would move my assemblage point, and he would do it by, it's called the Nawal's blow. Nawal is like a teacher. He would send energy like chi, how some of the martial arts artists use. They use chi energy. It's the same energy. And they would move, or he would move my assemblage point with a sudden burst of energy. It actually felt like he hit me in the back. But he never touched me, and that assemblage point would move into just the right position to put me into a very heightened state of awareness where he could basically program, information into me. If you hit somebody too hard, it's going to completely knock them out of this world as far as their perception is concerned. And this can also happen with fear, trauma. A lot of the people that are in mental hospitals that are catatonic, or they have other delusions, what they're seeing is real in a lot of cases, and it's because their assemblage point has moved from extreme stress. Chemical drugs can do it, or something traumatic has happened to them, and it's moved them out of this world. And
this is the first time I've ever heard this term, assemblage point, is when I talked to you for the first time, and I'm just wondering, is this part of the Toltec shamanistic secrets that have never been told?
It's pretty much exclusive. How to manipulate it, the how-tos about it have never been told. Carlos mentioned it quite often in his books, and he never told much more than I just told you. How to move it, what it does, and the methods, the angles. It has a lot to do with, different angular vectors. The direction you hit it from determines how it's moved. But I've never heard about it in any other shamanic culture. Now,
well, know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of acupuncture.
Yeah.
So is this the same energy field that acupuncture is toying with or manipulating?
Yeah, there are energy meridians that run through the entire body, not just nerves. The nerves usually follow the meridians, but these are pathways of energy, of this life force energy, again, 0-point energy. When you activate a certain area of the body, such as with the needles or the different acupuncture points, you're activating those nerves. That causes this energy to flow in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. It's useful to clear blockages, things like that. That's how a lot of Toltec shamans would heal people, is with pure energy like that. Things like Reiki that you hear about today, that's touching the surface of what the Toltec shamans, have done. And, the Chinese have the acupuncture, but the assemblage point itself is like the main key. That is more related not just to your health, but to your mental health, your mental perception. A lot of these people in these mental hospitals, they could be cured if their assemblage point was manipulated properly.
I get the idea that modern medicine would not accept these ideas.
That was true for a while, but actually that was the next thing I was about to say, is that there are medical doctors that have actually been able to discover with scientific equipment, they've been able to discover the existence of the assemblage point. So it's no longer just a theory or, folklore or anything like that. Scientists have been able to identify an area outside the body that, and there's also one inside, but we won't even get into that, but outside the body that is different. And they're starting to use a type of medicine, and this is not all doctors, of course. This is, pioneers. These are doctors that aren't afraid to step outside the box, and they're using a type of vibrational medicine. They use different vibrations of frequency, different vibrations of light, and you're seeing it in a lot of other technology that's being developed, like what Art uses on his back. That type of light is actually manipulating energies inside of him. But the assemblage point has been identified by medical doctors. In fact, there's a book out, I think it's called Vibrational Medicine. I forget the author, though. And they're beginning to deal, with this in the medical field. I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot of treatments that are involving the assemblage point. It's just they're using equipment, to manipulate it. They're not doing it the way the shamans do.
So to get back to what you were talking about before, you have developed some kind of technology that can activate this for anyone?
Yeah, and I first started off, this is what I've been researching for the last decade or so with the Monroe Institute. The Monroe Institute, for example, it was founded by Robert Monroe, and they were one of the leading institutions in the world on the study of human consciousness and human energy. And he developed a process called hemisync, which is basically using audio tones. You got to wear headphones. It puts one signal in the ear on the left and then a slightly different signal on the right, and it creates a beat frequency inside the brain. You hear a beat suddenly that's not really there. That beat causes the whole brain to function at that frequency.
Is this the binaural beats that we hear so much about nowadays? Okay.
Yeah, you're going to hear about that's the actual term for it. But what the Monroe Institute has done is they've taken it much further. They've combined frequencies, and they can actually control the electrical activity in the brain that helps to raise consciousness up. And they have programs that they teach, and they've developed audio courses that will take you step by step and start altering your consciousness and taking you up to levels of awareness that usually no one can normally reach. They've gone into other dimensions, and these are scientists doing this. This isn't just ordinary people. Physicists, for example, Thomas Campbell. He was one of the first people that Robert worked with. And they developed this technology to, a very sophisticated level where they can cause, expansions of awareness, move you to levels in planes of existence, other dimensions. And they do this in groups where there's like 6 people at a time go out. They call the Explorer Team. And they will go out and, have the same objective, the same mission. And then they will come back and, compare notes. And usually it's all the same.
Where do they go when you said they go out? Where do they go?
The way that they do that is they have environmental chambers. They're comfortable. They're not claustrophobic or anything, but they lay in these chambers and they put on headphones, and then there's a master control or a controller that speaks to a single person or all of them, and they start altering the frequencies. And Robert Monroe was more of a scientist. He was a big executive for broadcast network, and he didn't want to use the terms like astral plane, a lot of the Eastern terminology, and so being the scientist that he was, he went ahead and assigned levels of awareness, starting off like he called them focuses. Focus 3 is just where you can feel energy moving through your body. The next significant level was focus 10. And focus 10 is a state of awareness where your mind is wide awake, but your body is sound asleep. And the first time I ever experienced focus 10, it scared the heck out of me because I was alone, laying in bed in a dark room, and I went in, listened to the signals, moved in through the guided meditation from Robert, and entered focus 10. And, I was thinking, this is cool. It's kind of a weird feeling and all that. And all of a sudden I heard growling, and that scared me so bad I popped right out of it. And then the next time I went in and I heard that same growling after a few minutes. Turns out I was snoring in bed. My body was sound asleep, but my mind was like going 90 miles an hour. But that's just a springboard. That's the launching point, is focus 10. Then you move up into one of the next significant ones. There's focus 12, but focus 15 is a place where time just completely stops. Time is human illusion, the illusion of linearity of things passing in sequence. And at focus 15, all time and the awareness of time stops. And, you can be in it for 20 minutes and it seems like only, a minute has passed. But that's still not a real useful level. So they keep moving up. The signals change and they will move up, and your mind learns these things. So you don't really need the CDs or the sound after a few weeks of using them. You can do it yourself. But you get up into the higher levels. When you ask where they go, there are levels that are above the physical world, dimensional levels I'm talking about. You can pass through the actual veil, I call it the buffering zone because that's what it does. It keeps dimensions separated.
Between our world, the world of the living, and the world that we call the other side. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people call it the world of the dead, but it's far more complex. But that's where you pass through as you're moving in consciousness. You're not necessarily moving from your body, although that can be done. That's, we call that astral projection. But you can move up through the lower levels of the astral. And there's no real, Robert didn't want to call it that, but there's no real other terminology for it. The first two levels are a lower vibration. They're very close to our actual veil that separates our world from that world. And those are worlds you don't want to slow down in. You want to pass right through those, because that's where all negativity dwells, energetic, emotional negativity. All of the terrible things that people have, imagined or gone through, they exist there because in those places, thoughts are tangible, thoughts are real. What you think actually happens. And the higher up you go, the more prominent that phenomenon actually is. So usually you want to shoot right to those two. You don't want to slow down. There's nothing that can hurt you, but it can really terrify you. And then you start moving up into the other planes. And, you can move in the astral world. When a shaman or anybody goes there, it's different.
than this physical world. Your awareness and perceptions. For example, you see more than 3 dimensions. When you look at someone, you're seeing the back of them and the front of them at the same time. And it can get a little confusing, but, and that's, the topic of those worlds, almost a show in itself, but there are other entities there, that exist there and don't come here. You can move further up, even to that, into what is termed the divachanic or the mental plane. And those are still higher frequencies of human consciousness. Once you reach there, you start finding the place where people go when they die. That's Robert defined that as focus 21.
So can shamans access these different levels just naturally without using this kind of hemisync technology?
It's hard to control. Yes, they can, reach into those levels, but there are limitations with just shamanic training. And that's why, I've been working for, probably 10 years now, developing a technology, a series of frequencies based around the hemisync technology that will allow people to, achieve a greater perception here in the physical world. Right now you can use the hemisync technology and move into other dimensions, but in order to do what shamans do here in the physical world, which is, it's not just idle curiosity. Shamans do things, to help people and to help the planet. You have to be able to maintain that awareness. And hemisync doesn't work for everybody the same. It usually eventually will work for everybody, but part of my research is to find the reason for that, and which I have. It deals with the assemblage point. The hemisync signals that I've developed will actually directly affect the assemblage point, which means that almost anybody that uses, hemisync, if they're using this type of frequency, they can have, a much greater and more often, occurrence of the expansion of awareness. But there are a lot of things in Toltec shamanism that, for old school, a lot of the traditionalists aren't going to like this, but old school Toltec shamanism teaches you about how to calm the internal chatter, the silence. You got to calm down that thing going on in your head. It's like if you try to sit there for 10 seconds and not think of anything, no thoughts cross your mind. I don't know anybody that can do that, because your brain is constantly talking to you. It's telling you this color is red, that object is square over there. And in order to have the perception that a Toltec shaman needs, they have to quiet the internal dialogue. And so there are a lot of exercises. There are a lot of techniques. They're called different things, dreaming, they're stalking, and these are all things. And there's, things called not doings, which is basically not doing what you normally would do. It's the best way to explain it. And those things will eventually quiet the mind and stop the world. When the world stops, you see the world for what it really is. What we see are illusions around us. Things look solid because that's what our perception, our assemblage point tells us they are. But they're really energetic, and there are energies flowing back and forth between objects, between people. Carlos used to take me to the local park and just sit there, and he'd alter my assemblage point, and all the people would turn into like gelatin type objects.
I have some questions of my own that I have to ask before we can move on, just to sort of tie up everything that you've talked about so far, Marcus, and okay. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
So the assemblage point is exactly where? Is that above the head? Behind the head? Where is that?
It is above the shoulder blade. And most people, it's been in the same place. It's always above the shoulder blade, but it does vary in the distance from the actual skin. It's usually sitting out anywhere from, I've seen as close as 2 inches up to 6 inches. And I don't know what the significance of that is.
So it's a little different for everyone.
Yeah, it varies a little bit, but the actual frequency that it's tuned into is the frequency of humanity. It's the way the world is set. There are some people that march to a different drum, and part of it is because their assemblage point may be slightly off. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means they're different.
Because we're all unique. Okay, so
That's
do
right.
Toltec shamans believe that this assemblage point is the seat of consciousness?
That's a very good question. And it is definitely responsible for what we perceive, but I don't believe that it would be considered the seat of consciousness. That actually doesn't even exist in the human body. That's outside the body, and it's when I say outside, it's really inside, but it's outside the material part of the body. It's in a slightly different dimension. That's why consciousness continues on once we lose our body. It's not really part of it, but it's the assemblage point definitely, is like the fine-tuning knob. It tells us what we're going to see. And that also, I didn't answer your question before about how do you tell if a person is psychic. I can look at someone and look at their back and tell almost instantly if this person has psychic tendencies just by watching the assemblage point. It's either going to be like a glowing, it's brighter than the rest of the energy, but it will be either steady or it'll be pulsing or moving up and down sideways, or just blurring suddenly and stop. That's how I can tell if a person is truly psychic or not.
And this is something all Toltec shamans can perceive?
Yeah, once they reach that point where they can perceive energy, some people can do that naturally. People see auras. That's the same kind of energy we're talking about, except it's more of a bluish energy, the basic energy. There are energy fields that go further out that change colors and all that. That's what we call the aura. But not everybody has the same size energy body. The Carlos, for example, the average person is about 3 feet, extending from their skin outwards in all directions. Carlos, because of the amount of energy work that he did and the amount of energy that he took in, his actual energy field was about 30 feet. And that means you would be standing in his energy if you were within 30 feet of him. And that energy, it's the secret is to bring energy in, to energize yourself through the earth, through trees, through the sun. But you can't, it doesn't do any good to bring it in if it's just going to all leak back out, which is the case for most people. We squander our energy. And that's part of the training, is to seal up all the leaking spots in our energy field and to conserve the energy. I was, and part of the training that I went through, I was with Carlos down into Mexico, and he introduced me on a real strange set of circumstances to a shaman that he called the Immortal. And this shaman, this guy looked like he's in his 40s, come walking up in a T-shirt and jeans in the middle of the night. You were sitting around a campfire, and I wasn't real sure what was going to happen. I kind of suspected it because I had read his books, and he stuck his hand out and shook my hand. When he shook my hand, it was like a rush of energy ran down my arm, and my whole arm went numb. And what he had done was to take 1/4 of my life force energy. We don't have a whole lot of time to go into it, but human energy fields are divided usually in half. You have a right and a left. With some people, they have more than that. They have like mine is 4. Carlos's was 4. It's divided in half, and then horizontally it's divided in half. And those are energy compartments that are localized, and they have governors that allow energy to flow at different rates. He took 1/4 of my energy. Had I only had 2 compartments, he probably would have killed me. But the purpose of it, the way it was explained to me, is that this shaman, this Toltec shaman that did this to me, that's how he survives. He feeds off of pure energy. And it's an agreement, though. It's you can't just, he doesn't come and attack people or anything. But because of that, it rejuvenates his DNA, it rejuvenates the processes that we call aging. And they live, he called them an immortal, and I asked him how old he was, and, I didn't believe him at the time, but now with what I've learned, I'm starting to believe him. He said he was over 800 years old, and the guy looked like he was in his 40s. But what he did when he took my energy was to expand the capacity of my actual energy compartments. It's called the Nawal's gift. And when he takes that energy, it helps him for who knows how long. I didn't get a whole lot of information. That's a very secretive part of the lineage. But in exchange, he made it so that I can hold more energy. My energy fields extend about 6 feet out.
Well, since this is a normal state for you, this is a normal, natural world for you, but for many people listening, they're going to have a hard time believing.
Yeah.
And what would you say to that?
Well, it's not, they really don't have to believe. People have to open their minds up and trust their instincts. Some people are not in a position in life where they're ready for something like this. And there are a lot of people that are. There's no way I can, justify, or there's no way I can prove that the shaman was that old. That's what I was told. But I know ever since he did that to me, things started changing in me.
What changed?
Well, the more energy you're able to, this is life force energy we're talking about. The more energy that you can contain, in your being around you, basically the healthier you are. And I rarely ever get sick. And this is something that's evolved over time. If I get injured, I heal faster than I normally would. And these are just, subtle things that I've noticed.
Are these side effects of your Toltec shamanistic training?
Yeah, definitely are. And I think they're direct side effects from my meeting with that one shaman in the desert. Because by expanding the capacity of my human energy system, he allowed me to take in more energy at one time. We do things like age, and we get sick because our immune system starts breaking down. We have repair mechanisms that correct this, but as those start to break down, you get less and less of those. And that's what causes you to age. That's why some people age faster than others. It's what causes your body immune system to drop, because your automatic repair systems start dying off, the older you get. But the more energy you contain, the more those systems can repair themselves.
And is that why Toltec shamanism focuses just about everything on harnessing energy of the earth, energy of the human body?
That's right.
And focuses on learning how to handle that and use that as a tool, rather than just whatever you get is what you get.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's It's energy to help you connect with the earth, to help you live your life to its fullest, and not just you. It's shamans help other people. They're known as healers around the world, and they can help people emotionally, physically. The secret to a lot of healing is energy, and that's how you see a lot of things like faith healing. There's a lot of people that fake it. There's not.
I've seen more frauds. I don't know that there's anybody genuinely doing that. I think a lot of it has to do with the receiver's beliefs.
Yeah, that's a part of it. But there are some. They're very rare, but there are some that can heal, and with a touch. But there's probably maybe, I don't know, 1 in 1,000 that are the real deal, and that's how it works. They work with that person's, just like you said, their belief. You can't fight it off. I mean, you have to accept it, but they channel the energy through. It's not necessarily their own physical power. It's like when shamans move things, through telekinesis or psychokinesis. They're not using their brain power to do it. We don't have that much energy. They're tapping into other energy forces, higher energies, if you will, and they're channeling it down.
All right. Well, speaking of higher energy forces, before we run out of program here, I have to go back. I asked that series of questions so that we could get right back to this technology that you're developing and you're working on. So this technology is going to be available to anyone?
That's right. And it's going to be, for now, people can go to my website for my radio show, theshamansbrew.com. And it's a little premature because I'm about 3 weeks out before I'm going to start linking information to that. And this is this technology, this audio technology, and a series of meditations, and there'll be some other tools too that are available. But this is not something that I'm selling. This knowledge belongs to humanity. And so I'm making it free. All they have to do is go there and download it. If there are tools, there's going to be, some power crystals and other shamanic tools that I'll make available at my cost, whatever it might be. But this isn't, I'm not trying to make any money off of this. This was actually the reason I was picked. Carlos made the world aware of it, and then and there may be others out there. I just haven't seen them appear yet. But my job, my part of the transitional shamanism, is to give people the tools, especially with the earth changes coming up. We're entering a time when people need to stand together. They need to connect more to the earth and be able to deal with what's coming in the next 50 years or so.
Can you describe what you've developed? Is this a machine? I mean, what it sounds like to me is that it's specific sound files you've created.
That's right. It's a series of complex, alternating, the binaural beats you were talking about. It uses that, but it's a series of oscillating and pulsing sounds. And it took a while to find the right ones that would affect the assemblage point directly. And these actual sounds will open the door up. It quiets the mind down, which is necessary. It focuses on stimulating energies while shutting down the mind, and it opens up perceptions. It's done in a subtle way because I can't throw somebody into another world just instantly. It's a lot of people, wouldn't be able to deal with it. So,
well, that's why I'm taking this time when I should be. There's the calls coming in one right after the other, but I have to ask about this because I just wonder if people are ready for this. If this is free of charge, are people going to be prepared? Are they going to be ready for what this is going to do for them?
Yeah.
And what is it going to do? Are people going to be able to see the unseen world around us? What is this going to draw out of people?
Well, people can take this as far as they want to go. Basically, what it'll do is it will change the energetic vibrations of a person's aura to be more beneficial. We have so many toxins in our lives, and that's both energetic and chemical, that the body is in constant flux and panic trying to get rid of all this stuff. It'll help align and connect to nature itself. There are certain meditations you actually do with trees, because trees will draw energy like that out, any negative pulses. There are people that, some people aren't going to be ready. There are some people that want to take people down. There's people that they get joy for whatever reason in hurting other people. Those type of people aren't ready for something like this. They're not ready to come out of that negative quagmire and stand up and awaken to things. And so it's not for everybody, but for the person that's wants to heal themselves and learn how to heal others, for the people that want to communicate more with spirit, with nature, and we are all connected through this 0-point field, and by attuning yourself to it, you're able to connect with nature, other people, and you're centering and balancing. It's like, for example, most people have lost their connection to the earth, and that's very, very important. If you lose your connection through whatever reason, simply a lot of people don't touch the earth. A lot of people in the big cities wear shoes when they go outside, and they rarely come in contact with the earth. That's not the way that humans evolved. You need to be in contact, because the earth is pulsing at a specific frequency called the Shaman resonance, which is about 7 cycles per second. If you are away from that for too long, if you don't actually, when you hear people say grounding, that's what you have to do. If you're away from it too long, your body actually starts to deteriorate. Your immune systems, that's why a lot of people are getting all these fibromyalgia and a lot of different energetic symptoms and diseases, is because a lot of them have lost touch with the earth. This is something that will teach them how to get that back, and they can center and ground to the earth. A lot of people have lost their center. They emotionally, they don't know what's going on. They're all over the board, and that's the reason they've lost their connection. So that's one of the things that this technology, which is a complex series of sounds and guided meditations too. It's going to take you step by step to various levels. The old technology, or the old traditions of the Toltec shamans, the way they've been passed down for centuries, those still work. It's just that we don't have that much time.
Is this a shortcut?
It's a shortcut, but it's a more powerful. The difference is like building a house with power tools or building a house with hand tools.
Okay, and does it have a name? Have you named this series of sounds, this technology?
Yeah, no one's ever heard of this before. This is a first, but it's called Cygenesis.
Okay, Cygenesis. Okay. Yeah. And, I hate to tell you this, but I really hate that word aura. Yeah. This word is tossed around. It has certain meanings to certain people. It's used and bandied about. Chi, life force, energy, that's something I can grab on to. Now, people are going to say, well, you're just splitting hairs now. Chi is something that the Chinese culture has known about and harnessed and utilized for thousands and thousands of years. And people can say what they want about acupuncture, but it does work. But yeah, I also, that brings me to another point that's very important, which is why I'm passing up all the calls that are coming in right now, is because a lot of people get into this area of healing. Okay, this is a very dangerous area because there are people with genuine medical issues, and they're looking for answers that medical science can't give them, and they may go to something like this and think this is going to be the end-all, be-all to their problems. Now, I don't want to mislead anybody to think that. I would like to clarify that this technology, these sounds, may be beneficial spiritually. They may bring you to a higher awareness, but I don't want any claims of miraculous healing made on the program.
Yeah.
That's very dangerous territory.
Yeah, and that's actually something that, I cover with them. Nothing, whether it's Reiki, faith healing, anything like that, nothing should be used in substitution, for actual medical treatment, including this. This is not designed to heal you to begin with. It's designed to open you up so that you can accept other, healing. But it's got to be used in conjunction with medical science.
Okay, great.
So
I just wanted to make that
that's
distinction.
A good point to bring up.
Right, because, there's a lot of people out there that probably have given up on medical science and might look to something like this and toss all their medicine out the window. We're not saying to do that.
No, not at all. It's this is something that you can use along with it, but never go against your doctor's wishes.
Right, but achieving higher states of consciousness, I don't see it. Well, we are coming up on another break, and we will, I promise, start taking some calls. But is there any harm that someone can run into by utilizing this psigenesis?
No, it's been the process has been used, not the actual psigenesis, but the process of altering brainwaves has been used for at least 30 to 40 years. I forget the exact amount, and there's never been any harm at all. In fact, a lot of medical institutions are using the hemisync signals.
Okay. All right. Well, we will start taking your calls after this break. I promise. I have one holding right now very patiently for the last 20 minutes. We will get to you. We will get your question. Anybody have a question for Marcus Leader? 575-233-8008. We have covered a whole lot of territory in this program tonight, and it's still not enough. It's not enough, but we will be right back. All right, we're back, and the phone lines are smoking hot tonight on Midnight in the Desert. I'm Heather Wade. We're talking with Marcus Leader, who is a practitioner of Toltec Shamanism. And Claudia from South Lake Tahoe is here, patiently waiting on the line. Claudia, you are on the air.
Hi, Heather, and hi, Manuel. Absolutely fascinating show tonight.
Oh, his name is Marcus.
Marcus. Listen, I have a couple stories I'd like to share. I'll try to make it really short because I know there's a lot of calls.
Yeah.
I have a question for Marcus. One time I was talking to a friend and I said, there's something to do with birds. It's like they're really telepathic, and every time I talk to them, unbelievable things happen. Like I told a friend, I said, when I talk to the birds, all of a sudden hundreds will show up. And my friend was like, yeah, right, sure thing. Anyway, so I said, well, let's go outside. And I talked to him intuitively, not, call him.
Yeah.
And hundreds come.
Yeah.
And so that's just my question to Marcus is, are they messengers, or what's going on there?
Birds are, people have what's known as spirit animals, which is just a close working relationship. Usually a spirit animal will choose the person, and you don't have to be a shaman to have a spirit animal. But it's exactly like you said, it's more intuitive, because spirit animals will speak to you in concepts or usually in pictures. And you'll get an intuitive idea in your mind or a picture of something. And that's how those animals communicate. A lot of times, especially with birds, they are connected on a massive, it's almost like a web of energy. That's why you see birds flying in motion, and then all of a sudden they all change and the whole flock changes. They are connected on a very tight-knit web. And if you start communicating with one like that, and you actually make the contact, you have to open yourself up and let your energies flow. But if that happens, you could draw the attention of a lot. I've seen that happen before. And, you know, birds and shaman have pretty close relationships usually. I have had so many strange things happen with crows that I have to wonder is, you know, because shamans can project their consciousness into animals. It's a form of shape-shifting. And sometimes I have to wonder, is that really a crow? Is that possibly, you know, Carlos visiting or some other, you know, shaman? And they picked crows a lot because, you know, they tend to blend in. Crows are everywhere. But I've seen them do some really bizarre things. They've jumped in my truck as I'm driving down the road. You know, stop at a stop sign. They get in. I've had this happen twice. They'll get in, sit in the seat, and ride for a few blocks, and then jump out and fly out again. And I don't know why. I mean, and I've seen one. The funniest thing I've ever seen is I stopped at a stop sign, and I looked over, and there's this big crow. I mean, he was almost 2 feet tall, and he's waddling down the street. You know, crows usually hop. This one was waddling back and forth, and he had a lit cigarette in his mouth.
What?
And it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. And I didn't have anything to take a picture of it, but I just looked at this thing, and somebody apparently flicked a cigarette out while they were driving, and this crow picked it up, and he had it by the right end too. And he's just waddling down the street. He turned the corner and kept going.
Did he think it was food, I wonder?
I don't know. I hope he didn't try to eat it, but Carlos would play tricks like that. You know, he had the ability to go into the being, the consciousness of another animal, and they control the animal's body. They're not actually changing into that animal, but they can control it. And this may have been coincidence, but it was, you know, I just sat there and laughed because it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah, that paints quite a mental picture right there. So does that mean that for Claudia, just any kind of birds or the specific birds that she was communicating with are her spirit animal? Yeah,
any type of bird. Now, there could be different species. Like, you know, mine is a hawk. But it can be, you could have an affinity toward birds. That could be, you know, the frequency that you attune to. And, you know, if it's something that happens all the time, I would just embrace it, you know, try to communicate, send thoughts of, usually it's best to send thoughts of love or compassion or gentleness. You know, if you do that, you might find that the birds will get closer and trust you more. Mm-hmm. And they even land on you, and you can hold them in their hand like you see on the Disney cartoons. That's happened to me on several occasions. But it's hard to say why. It just may be that you have an affinity, your frequency of energy is compatible to theirs. And if you can communicate with them, communicate. They are our messengers. They can warn you of things, you know, happening. I've kept out of accidents on 2 occasions over the years from a bird flying. One was a hawk, another one was a crow flying right at my windshield. And I had to stop. And had I not stopped, it would have been a collision around the corner. And so they could be messengers like that. They just could be, you know, they could like your energy.
What if a person's spirit animal is a bear? Something dangerous like that. Does that mean that bears aren't going to kill that person?
No,
what does that mean?
Don't trust that. It's when you come to a dangerous animal, because a lot of people like to be powerful, you know, have powerful spirit animals, and just because you want it doesn't mean that that's going to be your spirit animal. There has to be a real affinity, connection. Don't think that you have a cougar or a bear or something like that as a spirit animal and go up there and try to hug them. You're going to have a rude awakening.
Right. That's what I imagined. So how does a person determine if they have a spirit animal and what that animal is? Usually
everybody does, and it's mainly because the energy that person gives off will have an affinity or an attraction by an animal. Some people are that way with cats. Some people are that way with dogs. And it can be hard. I get asked that question all the time. What is my spirit animal, or who is my spirit teacher? And I don't know, because I'm not you. It's a personal thing. If it's like with Claudia here, these birds, seem to come to her quite often. And I would say a bird, or that maybe even that species of bird, if it's the same type of bird, is her spirit animal. Those are the signs that you have to look for. Okay, so the animal will choose you and come into your life, and that's how you know. Okay, I had to know, since this is what we're talking about tonight. And you are on the air. Do you have a question for Marcus?
I do. I was wondering if anything you learned through any of those teachings, or anything you came across said anything about deja vu, and if that's possibly a sign that your consciousness is rising.
That can be, if you're having a lot of those incidences. Deja vu can be caused by a couple different things, and it's hard to say what, but a true phenomenon of deja vu is caused, and it gets real technical here because we're talking about time and the way that time flows. And a Toltec shaman sees time flowing as a sphere that I call the chronosphere. We're riding on the surface. That's our physical world. Sometimes there are currents and eddies and dips and like storms in time. And if you pass through one of those, it could throw some event from the past into your awareness or into the future. Sometimes deja vu can be something in the future, and you'll get just a flash of it. And it only lasts for a second, but it's a ripple, an actual ripple or storm existing in time that you pass through. And that's, what, because I've asked Carlos the same thing about deja vu that you just asked me, and that's the way that he explained it to me. What is your name, caller? I didn't catch that.
My name's Levi. I'm calling from Albany, Oregon. I've called quite a few times about deja vu.
Do you have that happening in your life quite a bit, Levi?
Yeah. The last about 6 months now. It's been happening upwards of 20 or 30 times a day. Really, really bad. It completely stops me dead in my tracks of what I'm doing or walking or anything.
20 or 30 times a day, so every half an hour you're having a deja vu event?
Yeah, sometimes 7 or 8 times in an hour.
Marcus, is there a reason for that? What is that indicating about Levi?
That's a pretty intense degree of that. It's indicating, first of all, that you're part of that is your ability to perceive that. It can also be caused by the fluctuation of your assemblage point. You may have an assemblage point that moves in flux, and it's actually to a certain degree it can move through this chronosphere, which is the past. If it's something you experienced in the past, it'll be underneath your feet, actually, metaphorically. But if it's something that's happening in the future, it sounds like you might be, your assemblage point may be oscillating to the point where you're picking up and tuning in on these different things. there are conditions that a lot of doctors will explain, and I don't fully buy that, but they'll explain that your mind is functioning so fast that you're experiencing something and then storing it as short-term memory at the same time. And that could account for some types of deja vu, but for the intensity you're having them in, I would say that your energy, your perception and awareness is evolving. It's not something that, that type of intensity could be, distracting, though. It's
I can imagine
you
it
should learn
would
to
be.
control.
Yeah. So, thank you, Levi, for the call. I've never heard of someone experiencing deja vu that many times in one day. Is that something he can learn to control? Where would he look for advice on how to figure out, one, what that is, and two, how to get back to a normal kind of life without deja vu every half an hour?
Yeah, and it depends a lot on if it's the current experience dropping into short-term memory and creating that feeling, but I think it's more than that with Levi. It's like I was telling you before, I've been working with different mediums and psychics that really don't want that ability, or they want to be able to turn it off, and you can learn to turn that off. You can tone it down. And part of it is the assemblage point manipulation, which is what I'm going to be releasing to the public very soon.
Okay, well, how can you possibly know that certain people have true psychic ability? Now, I'm not talking about looking at them and visualizing their assemblage point. I mean, in real life, has anyone who's claimed to have a psychic ability ever proven that to you with facts? Yeah,
I know a lot of people, so I've encountered people that they have access to information they shouldn't have. There is one that has hardcore scientific information, who's a physical medium. And a physical medium is different from a normal psychic or medium in that entities can, from the other side, can actually use her energy to cause a phenomenon to occur. And she has hours and hours of recordings where she is in a semi-sleep state. And if you listen to the recordings, someone's talking to her. You hear on the recordings completely different voices, and it sounds like there's a room full of people there. And some of them, I suspect might even be of a shadow person type nature. But she'll talk to them, but she's in a very light sleep at the time. And these voices manifest right out of the air. I mean, other people have complained to her that, and roommates, you can't have parties like that. And yet it manifests, voices from thin air, and it's using her energy. And those voices get recorded. And, there's been conversations too, using her energy on different seance type situations. There's been a few people like that in history, but not recently. So there are cases where you can tell, but I've also known people that are claimed to be psychic that aren't any more psychic than a doorknob. Yeah, I have a real hard time believing in that phenomenon, though I am open-minded about the paranormal. A lot of people claim to have psychic abilities, and I just have a very hard time buying it. I'm sorry. I do. Yeah. Yeah, and there's more that don't have psychic abilities. There are a lot of people that predict the future and all that, and the biggest problem with that, even if they have the ability, is the future is in flux. What is true for this moment in time, 10 minutes from now, might be different. And so it's very hard to be accurate predicting the future. All right. Let's move on before all the callers string me up here. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi, you're on the air.
You never know it's you, for sure.
Well, it is this time. Who are we talking to?
It's Pam from Oklahoma.
Hi, Pam.
Hi, Pam.
And I have, first I have to say Red Elk says hello. He's bugging the crap out of me. He says hello. He might have been that bird with the cigarette. I wanted to ask a question. I really have a problem. I know you know the answer to it. I've been studying shamanism for a long time, and I work with a lot of veterans that are crossing over, and you can make it a lot easier with shamanic ways. Anyway, the problem I have is things disappear, and I don't mean little things. I mean like Bose speakers and cell phones and expensive items. I don't know when they disappear. I just know that later I can't find them. And there's nobody here but me, usually, except my best friend that I've known since 1972. She's seen it occur, so it's not my imagination. Why does it? I know what is that? It never comes back. Well, very seldom, once in a while.
So you're sure? I just want to make sure we get this out of the way.
I'm more sure than you could possibly be. I mean, you're the worst skeptic I've ever. If you want me to give you Lori's number and you can call her, I am positive, and it doesn't just happen at my house. It happens at other people's houses when I'm there, but it's usually my stuff.
Okay.
But it's almost always electronic stuff, and it's stuff that doesn't cost $5, and I just don't understand where it goes.
Okay,
why it goes there.
I just wanted
I might be doing a drumming journey, or I might. What am I doing?
Well, I just wanted to ask. You're sure you're not misplacing?
No, I'm not. I don't. There's no burglars. I don't have a roommate. I have a bunny and a guinea pig, 2 birds, and a seeing eye dog. I don't really think they're doing it.
And you're not misplacing them on accident.
No.
Okay, all right. I had to ask.
You just put your hand where something was, and it's not there.
All right. Marcus, is there a shamanistic explanation for why her expensive items are disappearing?
Yeah, and actually it's not that uncommon. I've had it happen to me to a certain degree, but, luckily it's not that often. The items like that, now it's hard to say what's doing it, but physical items can move through dimensions. There are something we didn't even get into tonight. There are portals and energy openings. Some of them can be opened by spirit. Some of them occur naturally. They just open up and close again.
Heard of the phenomenon of apportation. I wonder if her items are being apported to somewhere else.
Yeah, and a lot of times, in fact, most cases, there's no reason for it. It's if it's done by an entity, a spirit that's crossed over, or an elemental. There's a lot of tricksters out there. If it's done by something like that, they're just messing with you. I don't know if it's out of boredom or what. That actually happens to my daughter a lot, who has a certain amount of natural abilities, but she'll set her keys down somewhere and then turn around and grab them, and they're gone.
That sounds exactly like what Pam was talking about.
Yep, and that does happen. It's hard to pinpoint why it happens. You're apparently, if you're on a shamanic path, then your energies are already different than the average person. And people who are psychic or who are being trained either by themselves or someone else, their energies stand out in the paranormal night like beacons. And these entities on the other side, or the ones that dwell within the veil, they see that and they go to it because it's a curiosity factor, plus it represents life force. And so they're automatically drawn to you. It could be somebody that you knew in the past that crossed over and is just playing games. It's hard to say, but usually the things come back, sometimes a week later, sometimes a few minutes. But it's, in Ireland, they blame it on fairies because it happens, quite often in certain places, and they think that fairies come and take things, and usually sparkly or fancy gadgets, and they will take that, and a lot of times it comes back, a lot of times it doesn't.
I don't think we don't have fairies in America, not that I know of, but Pam, does that help you understand it all, or do you?
I was hoping it wouldn't be. I sort of thought it might be that he might say that. I thought you might say that. I was hoping you would tell me a way to close the. It's just.
It's a little more complicated.
If I could win the lottery and buy all that stuff back, but I'm not good at winning the lottery, so it's just. I wanted to see if I understand the portal thing, and I also understand the trickster thing, and I also understand that I know I stick out. I mean, things happen that tell me that.
I would sit down and, some people feel strange about it, but just sit down and talk to whatever is there. Ask them to please stop doing that. And that might do it there, but you need to put up shields. If it becomes a nuisance, you need to put up shields around your house, around yourself. These are things that I'll be teaching also. I really try to do that on a regular basis, just because I live by myself and I don't, but to keep things out that shouldn't come in. But I'll do it specifically for thieves of my. I really wish it was keys. They only cost $70 to get a key. If it's a Bose speakers, you're talking, Yeah.
And I just can't imagine how. I would think I was hallucinating if I was on some kind of drugs, but I'm not. So I really appreciate your help. I'll go up there and listen.
You're welcome, and good luck.
Thank you for the call, Pam. I would be so mad if that was happening to me and items in my house were disappearing. That would make me pretty crazy. And it sounds like Pam's not too happy about it. And she never gets her items back.
That's a bad thing.
That's a problem. That's a big, big problem. So you said this is common.
Yeah, you hear about that, more often than you think. It sounds a little more severe with her, but it's not that uncommon for things to disappear.
All right. Well, I had no idea that topic would come up tonight. Your website is shamansbrew.com if people want to find out more about you. And I understand you have a lot of episodes of your show that people can listen to find out more about shamanism that we didn't cover tonight because there just is not enough time in this program.
Yeah, that's true. There's hundreds of hours of shows up there.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you spending your time with us this evening, Marcus, and I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, anytime. I appreciate you bringing me on, and I appreciate what you're doing, with the show, stepping in for Art. You're doing an amazing job.
Well, appreciate that. There were so many messages coming in, so many calls we didn't get to, but Friday for Open Lines, we will get to all of your calls and as many wormhole messages as we possibly can. And join us tomorrow night